The most popular interview questions, and it has been asked in many big tech companies: Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, etc. And they keep asking it, right? Because there is one of the reason is they usually use the tools, right? HackerRank. There are many online tools, and they already have this preset of questions where this questions pops up, right? And it is good example to test the candidate about the understanding of array and the time complexity when they are implementing the solution, right? So yeah, it's sometimes it get confusing and yeah, tricky. So let's look at this question. This one is asking us that given an array of integer nums and an integer's target, return indices of the two numbers such that they add up to the target. You may assume that each input would have exactly one solutions and you may not use the same element twice. Okay, so whenever you get this get any question, I would say read it carefully, look the input and output in the example and make sure that you understand it. If you don't understand, ask the question. Okay, that will help to understand the problems. Once you understand the problems, right, you have to ask some questions, right, for the clarifications if you need to, and making sure that you and the interviewer are on the same page. Okay, now this is also important, the constraint that this length of the array should not be less than 2, obviously, because we have to add those two numbers that should give us the target, right? If it's less than 2, that's not gonna work for you. And also the maximum length. Okay, so these are the assumptions we can think of, like we can just have this assumption as well. Now let's see the approach, right? So obviously there is a very less time to run through all the all the things, right? uh, in the interview, right? It's a very small window, and usually the questions they have uh, in the interview should get complete within 10 to 5 10 to 15 minute max, right? 5 minute I would say it's good. So obviously, right, once you start practicing coding interviews, your mind start thinking in that directions, right? How to use the data structure, which data structure is good, what the approach I should take, right? And it comes with the practice. So I would recommend that you should practice one or two questions every day. Okay. Now, usually you will and getting this kind of editor where you can write the questions, write your write your solution. Okay, so this is a solution class which already has a empty signature for the method which you need to implement, right? So I will say, okay, let's start writing without looking much into the problems. Then you might end up getting the wrong answer, or you may implement something which your interviewer is not interested, but he's looking something else, right? Because the next question in the interview is always on the solution uh, which you're gonna implement. All right. So we are gonna implement this method which gonna return as the indices. Okay. So our input uh, is the two an input array target, right? So we have to find the numbers that will return us, right? So what we're gonna like approach, how we gonna approach the problem? The first approach is gonna be brute force approach, loop through the array, and then from the zero and loop inside a loop, basically. That will give you the answer, but the problem is the time complexity. increase, right? So it's an O(n) square, and we don't want to do that, right? The other approach would be, right, use some data structures to hold the data and do the lookup while you're looping through that, so that you will you will iterate through the element once only, and that will give you the time complexity as O(n), right, at max, which is very good. Okay, so let's start implementing it. Let's go for the second solution. So I'm gonna need a lookup. Need a lookup. That means I'm gonna use a data structure that will holds my numbers. But at the same times, I also need. I'm not going to return the numbers because that's not what the ask here. The ask here is to return the indexes, right? Need a storage that hold both, right? That hold the number and index. Okay, so what is the first choice? We have a map, right? So we're gonna say, all right, we can define a map, okay, that will take the two integers. So my first, okay, sorry, integer, right? Integer, yeah. So, and it's here also. Okay, so it will hold two integer, right? One will be my numbers and the second will be my index, right? So basically map has a key and value. So my key would be my number, okay, and my value will be my x. So now my IDX map, I'm gonna name it, and then I'm gonna initialize it with, I'm gonna, okay, yeah, so it's a hash map, all right. So that will holds the numbers and its index. I also need to return the result. So I also need to define a result that will be an array, and I know the length because I only need the two numbers indices that we need to return. So this is what we're gonna return it, right? And the third thing is the condition. This is where the logic comes into the play. So we're gonna loop through the array from index 0, okay, int I equal to 0, and we'll go all the way to the length of the array, okay, so length. And I'm sure you're familiar with the for loop syntax. This is pretty old. We are using since C++ as the same syntax. All right. Now here, one thing we need to see, we need to store the, okay, we need to store the numbers num id map, right? So num idx map dot put the numbers and its index. Okay, now I'm putting the numbers and index. However, it's not gonna help here, right? We are just initializing the lookup with its value, right? The numbers and the index. But we also need to make sure that as soon as we also need to make look into the lookup, the map, and see if those two numbers are there. So how are we gonna look up the numbers? Here is one thing. These two numbers is, for example, number 1 plus num2, that gives us the target. Okay, so once I know the one number, I can easily calculate the second number. That would be my target minus my first number. Okay, So this is what we're gonna use in the condition block. So if my map, which is num idx map, if it contains the key, okay, that is nothing but the target minus nums I. Okay, my machine is getting slow, I'm sorry about that, but let's continue on this one. So I'll see what is the issue after we finish with this one, right? So once we, okay, now we are looking into this nums IDs maps. If it contains the key, we can simply return it. Okay, we can construct the result and return that. So it's a result 1. So the 0 would be my index of the numbers which is exist in the lookup. So nums idx map, okay, dot get the value of the key. So I need to pass the key. What is my key? My key is the target minus nums I. Okay, that will give me the number which is already stored into the lookup map. All right, and my second index is, I guess you already know that, right? So the next index is I. Okay, so these are the two indexes which makes our result complete, right? And then we can simply return the result. Yeah, so that's pretty much it, right? Well, we also need to make sure if we don't find anything, we can return null, or we can simply return the empty result. Okay, that makes our solution complete, right? Now let's review again. We need to make sure that we are not going with the O(n) complexity, right? So no, we need to make sure that our solution has the O(n) complexity, time complexity. So for that we are is creating a lookup, and we are looping through the element only once, and as soon as we loop through that, we are also putting the element into the lookup if it's not, and then we starting from the second, like this if logic start from the second one, because the first it won't go there, the first number won't be there, right? So from the second, right, when the index, we go from the second index, it will start looking into the, it will also start using that lookup. Look at the magic here, right? We didn't fully we fully fill this lookup, we start using as well, right? So that's the magic, that's the beauty, and that will save the time. Okay, so in this one, right, we will get instant result. All right, so let's run it and see where is the